We led forth in peace. The mountains and hills, the earth, the sun, like trees, the feet.
Hi, I'm Jared. I'm your host tonight for Views and Brews. The Mount St. Helens Institute is a nonprofit partner of the Forest Service, and our mission is to advance understanding of the Earth through science, education, and exploration of volcanic landscapes. Some of the ways we're doing that is with live virtual field trips to Mount St. Helens. Our education team is leading private trips and family camps. And of course, there's Views and Brews, as well as many other programs. If you'd like to make a donation to keep these programs going, you can visit our website by following the link posted in the event. The Mount St. Helens Institute is a proud partner of the Cowlitz tribe, and we encourage you, wherever you are, to learn about the indigenous cultures where you live. We operate on the land of the Cowlitz tribes and the Confederated Bands and Tribes of the Yakima Nation. If you have questions tonight during the event, please feel free to ask them in the chat feed, and we'll get to as many as we can at the end. Our presenter, Brice Crayne, is a project manager at the Lower Columbia Fish Enhancement Group. He's a lifelong fishing enthusiast and has worked with several state agencies as well as the Chinook tribe. Brice, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me. Yeah, thanks, Jared. Thanks for the invite. The Mount St. Helens Institute. I encourage you to, get up on the mountain and see it from a whole new perspective after this presentation. So I've been with the Lower Columbia Fish Enhancement Group since about 2015, and our little group of 5, we do a combination of in-stream wood placement, building log jams. We work in floodplains, restoring riparian forests. We do some nutrient enhancement using surplus hatchery salmon carcasses. And we try and do a little bit of outreach. So this is part of the outreach program. And today I'm going to be giving a presentation on one of our focal watersheds, the South Fork Toutle River. Our group has been working on the South Fork Toutle River since about 2007, and today I'm going to walk you through the watershed, provide some context as for why restoration is necessary in a river like this, teach you a little bit about terms and terminology of the restoration world. We're going to look at some photos and some videos, and then end with a good before and after of some of the restoration projects that we've done. So make sure I'm sharing the right screen here. So the many of you from our region were around when the mountain erupted in 1980, the mountain being Mount St. Helens or Lewitt. And the mountain, when it erupted, it erupted northward, and it really created a permanent change to the North Fork Toutle watershed. And as you can see in this map, there was a debris avalanche that went north, created Coldwater Lake, created Castle Lake, had a dramatic impact on the landform of the North Fork Toutle. And today there's a sediment retention system, SRS, on the North Fork, retaining a lot of that sediment that is in the North Fork Toutle, keeping it from flowing down the Toutle River, down the Cowlitz, into the Columbia, filling in the dikes and levees that are protecting Castle Rock, Kelso, Longview. And unlike the North Fork, the South Fork didn't have that large landslide, and it did have a lahar flow. A lahar, according to Wikipedia, it's a mud flow, debris flow. It's a slurry. It's like a concrete slurry coming right down the chute and filling in the entire South Fork Toutle River floodplain. And so while the North Fork was completely changed, the South Fork was filled in, but the South Fork actually had previous lahars. And as you can see in this photo, there's layers of lahar flows over the years that have filled in the South Fork Toutle floodplain. And so this black line here is actually an organic layer separating different lahar events. And so the lower event, you know, is 10 to 13,000 years old, happened during the Swift Creek eruption phase. I learned this from my good buddy Nick Legg over there at Wolf Water Resources. Thanks, Nick. He's a geomorphologist. And then what we've learned over the last several years is that this 1980 event actually buried some of those older terraces with a new layer, with a thin layer of veneer, and then filled in the channels that were in between those existing terraces. And it's just kind of a cycle in this watershed where the mountain erupts, sends a lahar down the river, and then over the course of the decades and centuries, it grows new forests in those floodplain terraces. Those forests grow to mature old growth forests. And when an old growth tree falls in the river, it has a lot bigger impact than a small little 12 to 20 inch stick that falls in there. And so these processes have to go through succession. Our work is trying to accelerate that recovery and that natural recovery of those floodplain forests in the South Fork Toutle floodplain. So this map is showing previously completed, active, and future planning of work in the South Fork Toutle watershed. So for context, here's Mount St. Helens. Again, the mountain erupted northward. Here's the North Fork. And the sediment retention system is about here. Fish still have access into the upper Green River, and then they have access into the South Fork Toutle River. Both of those rivers are free flowing. So in about 2007, the Lower Columbia Fish Enhancement Group partnered with a new development in the watershed called Steelhead Landing. And we started to build log jams in the South Fork Toutle because the South Fork, without any structure in the floodplain, can wash from side to side to side, back and forth, and continuously rolls the vegetation that's trying to get established, just scrapes it back clean. With each large flood event, it just scrapes that floodplain clean. And so we started putting these larger log jams out there to provide the structure for those forests to get established. So we've worked, this cluster of projects here is us getting started, getting used to working in this watershed, learning how to build specific types of log jams. Down here at the mouth of the South Fork Toutle is at Harry Gardner Park. And we've done a number of projects there too, building log jams, as well as we just wrapped up a project where we planted over 50,000 trees over 50 acres. So that was a pretty good sized project. And now we're moving upstream of this, this green cluster into what you see, this yellow and blue. So the blue represents areas that we've already gone through the process of designing our plan. And now we're starting to try and implement it. So our most recent grant application is this yellow reach. And I'll show more close-up photos and videos here in a moment. All of these projects so far have been in the lower river, and then the South Fork Toutle goes through a canyon reach that's about 10 miles long, and then it opens back up into an upper valley. And so we just wrapped up in 2019 and 2020 a few projects in some smaller tributaries of the upper valley, and I'll also profile these in a minute. And then this red line here represents a current project that I'm working on with Wolf Water Resources, Waterfall Engineering, and SMETA Environmental Associates. We're teaming up with DNR, Weyerhaeuser, Tall Corn Forestry, U.S. Forest Service. We're all coming up with a plan for restoration efforts in this Headwaters Valley. And almost all of this work that's been done so far has been funded through the Salmon Recovery Funding Board. So I definitely need to give a shout out to them. all this work that we've been doing is because of the endangered species in this river. Now, a lot of us that live in Southwest Washington, we forget that these fish are listed on the endangered species list. This map shows the Chinook distribution in the South Fork Toutle. So they use a lot of this lower river. That's why a lot of the projects so far have been funded in that lower river. But there's no falls like you have on the Washougal River, Dugan Falls, that would stop the Chinook migration. And they can go as far up this watershed as they have water. Now, they're a bigger fish, and so they need more water. We've seen them. This is Trouble Creek Canyon here. Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife has documented Chinook spawning as high as this. So this map's not perfect, but it gives you a good indication of where the fish are, or what type of habitat the fishes are using in their distribution. This is a map showing Coho. So if we go back real quick to the Chinook, you can see they use mostly the main stem river in the lower half. Whereas the Coho, they're reaching all the way up to the flanks of Lewitt itself. This is Goat Creek here, Trouble Creek, Disappointment Creek, Bear Creek. We're going to see some work that we've done in Bear Creek, and Bear Creek's here, and then Harrington Creek, we'll see some work that we've done in Harrington Creek. So we started off prioritizing these tributaries because we have a lot more certainty in when we're doing these kind of projects, that a project completed in a tributary is going to be more predictable as to how the stream's going to respond. And so we're starting off with restoring these tributaries, creating these protected core areas where these fish can spawn and rear, and then we'll work our way through the main stem. So for the next several slides, I'll be giving a tour of the South Fork. So starting at the mouth at Harry Gardner Park and then flying all the way up to the mountain. Here we can see River Mile 0. This is the South Fork Toutle, and this is the North Fork Toutle. This is their confluence, and this is Harry Gardner Park in the background. So LCFEG built these log jams in the first phase of restoration, and then we came through, and then we've planted, like I said, over 50,000 trees out here. And we're trying to establish some forests in this floodplain, and it takes structure to protect those forests from these rivers. And structure like this, so this is a good example of what we're calling an island forming jam. So this is up in the Steelhead Landing Reach. There was already on this floodplain, there were several larger cottonwoods, probably 15 to 20-year-old cottonwoods. They were the only ones in the floodplain, and so we built this island forming jam directly upstream of those to allow them to mature. That was, again, a multi-phase project where we went through first and we installed all the structure. And then we came in later after the river had recalibrated, and we planted behind that structure to help add some diversity to the plantings. So a lot of what you see here is dogwood and nine bark, as well as we plant a combination of species. We've seen a lot of success with Oregon ash in this floodplain, Douglas fir, and a little bit higher areas, western red cedar. We plant a lot of western red cedar, a lot of willow species, diversity of willows. And then we've experimented a little bit to see if Sitka spruce will grow out there, and it's doing well. Western white pine is doing well. And so we really try and maximize our diversity and plant between 15 and 20 species when we're doing these planting projects. Continuing upstream a little bit further, this is what we're calling the Johnson Creek Reach. I've named these reaches based on the tributaries that flow into them. And this isn't Johnson Creek itself. This is what we call the Johnson Creek Reach of the South Fork Toutle River. So this is Tom Smeda here, Smeda Environmental Associates. He's about 6 foot tall, so you can see the size of these structures that we're building out here. This structure is a floodplain roughness structure. It's made to catch this wood. The old timers that you talked to about the South Fork Toutle that were there before Army Corps and DNR and Weyerhaeuser all kind of partnered up to remove these what they call them drifts. They didn't call them log jams back then. In fact, down there near Harry Gardner Park, there was what they called the big drift. And you know, it was 400 to 500 yards long and 50 feet tall and 150 feet wide. These were massive accumulations of wood. And so we're trying to mimic these natural processes and rebuild these drifts, because without the structure in the floodplain, that vegetation continuously gets turned over and flushed downstream. And so by doing a combination of structures in the channel that provide instant fish habitat, as well as structures on the floodplain that help retain the woody material, the organic material, and the sand and sediment that allows the vegetation to grow, that's kind of our twofold strategy. Continuing up a little bit further, you can see in this shot, in the very background is the 4700 road bridge. For those of you familiar with the watershed, here's the 4100 road bridge. These are roads, forest roads maintained by DNR and Weyerhaeuser. In this case, you can see some forest getting established here and here and here. And so when we came up with a plan for this site, we planned on building big drifts at the heads of these areas that would allow the river to snake through them, but also would protect those vegetated areas and allow them to mature. You can see a few small Doug firs growing in this floodplain, and so we know that if we don't have as frequent flooding over the top of those areas with big logs flowing over the top of there, then we can allow those trees to mature. You can also see in this photo a relic of the eruption, the 1980 eruption. The road used to cross right across here. But the mountain did her job and cleaned out all the infrastructure in the waterway. This next shot is also of the Brownell Reach, same reach as the last shot. This is the upper Brownell. They're about the reach is about 2 miles long. And in here you can see how the main channel comes around this corner and occupies this left side of the photo. And then there's a side channel that comes over here. Well, if you're 3 inches long, a fish that has found its way into the main stem from the tributaries where it was likely born, coho and steelhead, most of the spawning is in tributaries or in side channels like this, then you're not going to spend the winter fighting the cold flows of the main stem river. You're going to find tiny pockets here and here. Ideally, you would find a beaver pond to spend the winter in. Maybe a pocket of water that has some groundwater coming into it that's warmer in the winter, knowing that you've got to spend the entire 12 to 15 months in freshwater before you head out to the ocean. And so when we came up with a plan for this reach, we wanted to keep some of these natural features, the side channel, encourage a little bit more braiding in the channel out here with adding some structure here in the middle. But we also don't want the main stem to come across here and then shoot right through our floodplain forest that we're going to try and get established out here. And so we'll add some extra wood along these banks and lines. And we're really trying to create a delicate balance with adding semi-permanent structure with wood pilings and large pieces of wood that are secured together without trying to tell the river exactly where to go. It takes some balance, and that's why we put a team together to go through these together. I've also got on this slide, I'm showing that this is called a response reach. That's your trivia term for the presentation. So a response reach is the South Fork comes out of a narrow canyon and then opens up. And then a response reach is one that has generally has a higher sediment load. So it's in a constant state of flux, especially when it doesn't have the structure. And so by adding structure, it's a natural place for logs to deposit. And so naturally, if the headwaters of the river and the watershed had its historic wood supply, then we would see a large drift right here naturally. And so we're planning on starting that process by building a log jam across here, preloading it with as much wood as we can afford to put in there, and then recruiting more wood that comes down the river naturally. So I bounced from the lower river through the canyon reach up to the bottom of the upper valley. So this creek is called Bear Creek. It's one of the larger tributaries of the South Fork Toutle River. And LCFEG contracted with Mike Waters Excavation, Waterfall Engineering, Patrick Powers. He helped us with this, the engineering plans for this site. The project was funded through the Salmon Recovery Funding Board. And we put in these large, long root wads. And in this case, we bolted a few of them to the bedrock. We drilled right into the bedrock, put epoxy anchors into the bedrock, drilled through the logs, and then used a large diameter chain to connect the two. Because we don't want those logs just floating up and going downstream. The investment was for this site, and so we wanted some of that wood to stay put. If we had 300-foot tall Douglas fir trees that are 8-foot diameter that we could plop down in there, we wouldn't have to secure it. That's the natural building blocks of these streams. But when you got to work with what you got, and so we have to use a little bit of artificial hardware for that. Later on, I'll show some before and afters photos of work in Bear Creek, and you can kind of gauge for yourself why we're doing what we're doing out there. It'll be more clear in a minute. Harrington Creek is another creek that we've worked in. We're up River Mile 2021 now. Harrington Flats at one time, again, talking to some of the old timers about this watershed, Harrington Flats had more board feet of wood per acre than anywhere else known. And there was 8 to 12 foot diameter Douglas fir trees that were 350, 400 foot tall. And there was dozens of them right here on this little flat. And so even though the soil seems pretty sterile, it does grow Douglas fir trees really well. After the 1980 eruption, Fish and Wildlife was looking for off-channel opportunities for coho salmon in particular, but also for steelhead. And so they redirected Harrington Creek to flow across this terrace on the right side of the floodplain. And when they did that, it was a good thought. They succeeded. They created instant habitat. And it's, for the last 40 years, it's been pretty productive habitat, but it was pretty channelized. And so when I got in there again with Patrick Powers in Waterfall Engineering, we wanted to expand the habitat and allow the fish that were reared there, that spawned there and emerged from the gravel, spent the summer there, we wanted to provide them with some winter rearing habitat. And when the stream was channelized, those fish didn't have access to floodplain and calm areas where they could hide. And so this is an example of a floodplain expansion project, and it's been pretty highly successful. I'll show some more imagery of that later. This is an image from the spring following, a video from the spring following restoration work. When you first do that much destruction, going back here, when you first cause this much destruction in a natural area, I personally have a knee-jerk reaction to it. And it isn't until I get back out there in the springtime and I see all these juveniles have come out of the gravel, the adults spawned there. These are the proof is right here. So in this video, you can see a little steelhead right here. And you can see coho here. You can see the coho have these really distinct white rays on their dorsal fin. So you've got multiple species. You've also got some case caddis and fall caddis in there too. Pretty neat little video there. So to build these log jams, this is a video from 2020, further upstream in the Little Cow Reach. This is Jeff Roberts. He's one of the main operators with Mike Waters' excavation. That boulder weighs about close to 10,000 pounds. And in that log jam built there, sorry, just checking, making sure my wife's letting me know that it's still rolling. So these log jams were built right in the main stem. And in order to build these log jams, you need big equipment to be able to carry around these big logs. And so this piece of equipment, this excavator here is specially built for these log jam construction. And I couldn't do, we couldn't do what we do without these contractors who are willing to bring their equipment out into these rough areas. You know, they love doing what they do, and they're sure making a difference by doing the heavy lifting. So continuing upstream in the Headwaters Valley, this is a great shot because it shows what we call a wall-based channel. So this isn't even fed by a tributary. This is just water that the floodplain is picking up. Here's a secondary channel, and then here's the main stem here. This is in the springtime in 2019, I believe. So these, you imagine, I've talked about that wintering habitat, overwintering habitat. What a prime place, right? This is so much easier place to spend the winter when you're not consuming a lot of energy. You're a cold-blooded species, and you're just kind of living off of the reserves that you had, filling your stomach maybe once a week instead of during the summer when you're filling it a couple times a day. Versus trying to fight the current out here, you'd be using a lot more energy out here in the main stem. And so these off-channel habitats are so critical to these anadromous species. Continuing up, here's a creek called Trouble Creek. In your initial glance at this photo makes you think that this is just a pristine area. And I thought the same thing. But then if you look closer, you see a cut off stump. There's not a stitch of land up here that hasn't been touched by us at some point. Now this little watershed's in a lot better shape, and we're actually using it as a reference reach for the conditions that we're trying to create in some of the other areas. And so I show it to kind of show, you can see the larger rock here versus the smaller gravel here. So wood, when it's in the stream, it sorts the gravel and it puts the big stuff over here and the little stuff over there, and that allows the bigger fish to use the bigger gravel, the smaller fish to use the smaller gravel. And it creates underwater flows called hyporheic flows, and it increases the exchange of the surface water with the groundwater. Continuing up the upper valley, you've got Nick Legg from Wolf Water Resources here, Tom Smeda, Smeda Environmental, and this is a creek called Stump Creek. Look at all the fine gravel in here. And when you see the imagery of the main stem, you'll see how critical these tributaries that are flowing right through the South Fork Toutle floodplain can be. Now we're right now, there's all the white water for the South Fork on the far side. Now we're still developing the plans for that headwaters area. You can see the Scotch broom. I think this actual tributary here is actually one of the point sources for Scotch broom seeds, and so we'll be coming up with a plan to address that. This steelhead project, as we're calling it, the South Toutle Headwaters Design, it's going to be a multi-year, multi-phase project, and it's taking a lot of thought, and we sure, again, appreciate the Salmon Recovery Funding Board for funding this opportunity to create a watershed scale plan for this river. Continuing up, we've got Disappointment Creek. I'm going to zoom in on this one. We've got Disappointment Creek trickling through, and then you've got what Tom Smeda deemed the ladder of cascades. You can see just these rungs of ladders, just these steps going up the watershed of the South Fork Toutle. And you can see the depth of the lahar flows up here. it's just staggering the impact of that the 1980 eruption and subsequent lahars had on this watershed, and how it's been able to clean itself out, work itself back and forth, and it's trying to heal itself. The further up the watershed we go, the more drastic the impact from the 1980 eruption. Here you see Goat Creek coming in. Goat Creek's source is right off the mountain. It flows through the Goat Creek Marsh and then comes down into the South Fork Toutle. Here's the South Fork Toutle, and you can see Goat Creek is about the same size as the South Fork at this point in the watershed. And then you can see those ladder rungs going down through the Headwaters Valley. So the Steelhead team and the Steelhead project, we came up here and we're looking at all these areas, and we were pleasantly surprised when we got up into Goat Creek and we found this 1 to 1.5% slope chocked full of these pools, and also chocked full of juvenile coho salmon. So they're coming clear up the South Fork, almost to the flanks of the mountain. This is a core area for those coho and steelhead, and it's an area that needs to be protected. And there are some gaps in between the log jams that we could enhance with probably a helicopter flying in wood, dropping it in the channel, having a light touch on this area because it is a sensitive area. But we were pleasantly surprised to see such high quality, low gradient habitat so high in the watershed when the rest of the river was so steep. Up here, the South Fork is probably close to 5% slope, whereas here in Goat Creek, which is just upstream of that confluence, it's only about a 1.5% slope. So that difference in slope is what allows these spawning gravels to settle out. And this wood accumulations in here is sorting that gravel and providing the spawning and rearing habitat. So this is the last stop on the tour. Here you've got the Lewitt, the fissure, the canyon, which is the source of the South Fork Toutle. You see virgin old growth forest that was protected from the eruption because the eruption went northward. We're westward of the mountain. So you've got old growth forests up there still protected in the Gifford-Pinchot National Forest. You've got tall corn forestry growing trees here. You've got Washington State Department of Natural Resources growing trees here. You've got these terraces that the diversity of conifers are starting to recolonize here. Noble fir, Douglas fir, western hemlock, western red cedar. We've got a pretty good diversity of conifers growing up here on these floodplain terraces. But the river is still healing, you know, even after 40 years. Up until 2008, the river was flowing through this channel over here. And then it found a soft spot and it started to erode, and it completely cut through this floodplain forest and avulsed into this channel and occupied the lower half mile of Goat Creek. And that can happen again. You know, there's another threat of another avulsion to cut over this way. But, you know, this is also now starting to grow a new forest that's lower elevation than this. And like I said before, here we are closest to the mountain. This is where the deposits of the 1980 eruption were the deepest. And so as we're developing our restoration plan, we know that this area is still recalibrating from that 1980 eruption. We're going to spend most of our time and energy downstream, about 5 miles from this, 4 miles from this, and then let this to continue to evolve. So from here, I'd like to show some before and after photos of restoration work. So this is Harrington Creek. These photos aren't perfect slides of each other. So a couple reference points. These culverts are a reference point. And then I'll be pointing out, you can see here how the stream is relatively straight and in a bit of a ditch. The 4100 road used to cross right here. It was decommissioned after the wood was salvaged from the floodplain. Here's an ATV trail. That's not a secondary channel. The river kind of snakes around a little bit. This is a little bit of an island in the secondary channel here. But then as we look at this image, this is a year post-construction. Here's the culverts again. That ATV trail is right along here. And then here's that really straight stretch that I was talking about. So you can see we expanded the floodplain where the stream was really restricted to about a 25 foot channel before. Now it has about 75 to 80 feet wide floodplain to work with. And so step one is to pull the floodplain back. Step two is to put wood into that floodplain to add structure to sort that gravel like we talked about as wood does. And then the third step in restoring this little reach is revegetation. So we've had the Northwest Youth Corps up here before, planting trees, putting in willows, putting in western red cedars, noble firs, white pine. And what we're anticipating through here is that we'll have these segments of habitat through Harrington Creek where we've got beaver ponds in one area providing really productive rearing habitat, and then the stream will be a little bit more narrow and will have a spawning reach that will seed the beaver ponds and produce larger smolts so that those fish are healthier when they head out to the ocean. And so this combination of work strategically creating habitat that is focused on the specific life cycle of a specific species of fish is one of the things that our group really tries to target. Continuing into Bear Creek, this is more of a better slide. So when you look at this image of Bear Creek, it's beautiful, right? You've got these alders reaching out over the river. You've got lots of shade over the stream. And most ecologists would just say this is a beautiful example, and myself included. But I would also be asking myself, where are the fish spawning? You know, I see lots of cobble. I see lots of, the only gravel pockets that I see are high and dry. And where would those 2 and 3 inch fish hide if the river is raging through here? You know, this is a summertime photo. And so what we did, these boulders here are these boulders here. And so we put these long stems, these are 120 foot long stems that Mike Waters and Jeff Roberts with Mike Waters Excavation produced on site. And then they were able to keep them full length and manipulate them down into this narrow channel. Again, very, very grateful for those operators. And what this does is it creates these pockets of backwater during the fall. And when you have slow water next to fast water, that's when you get the sorting of the sediments. And now you can see in this image, this is Bear Creek again, in that treated reach, we're seeing fish spawn, and we're increasing the spawning area because we've got a lot more gravel retention. And so now the fish just simply have more space to spawn. And then the juveniles that we're rearing in here, they have all these little nooks and crannies to hide from the kingfishers and hide from the otter in these streams and to find refuge from the flows. They don't have to use as much energy during the winter. And so by adding the woody structure out there with boulders and large logs, we're able to create a dynamic habitat that meets the life stages, multiple life stages of these fish. So to close, I'm going to show you a video of some coho salmon in Harrington Creek And you'll notice here there's multiple bucks that are kind of fighting for the rights to spawn with the hens. And I apologize if the narration doesn't come through well, but here we go.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There's 5 coho weighing right there.
So there you got to see that one big buck. He was kind of working his way downstream, pushing those other smaller bucks out of the way, saying, no, I think I'm going to spawn with these ladies. And that kind of also on this one day, we counted 76 coho in this one little reach. You know, it was a 2,100 feet section of stream. You know, that means we saw a red every 70 feet. We saw hens competing, chasing each other off for the right to spawn in one specific spot. You know, when you get this level of fish coming back to the stream, now you're driving genetic competition, and that's what allows these fish to adapt so quickly. And so that's my presentation. You know, I've got to thank my team for all their support, all of our partners that we work with. I think I've mentioned them over the course of the project. And yeah, Jared, thanks for giving us the opportunity to kind of profile what we're doing out there in the South Fork.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for being here. A couple of questions for you if you got time. So with the fish populations, you know, going up and the habitat being restored, how's that impacting other species in the area?
Oh, good question. So, I mean, as a keystone species, salmon bring all those nutrients they leave our rivers and they weigh, you know, like 5 to 10 per pound. And then they come back, that big buck that we saw in the video there, you know, that's probably about a 12 to 15 pound salmon. And so all those nutrients that they gain up out in the ocean, we call those marine derived nutrients, they're bringing those against gravity. You know, rivers are great at exporting nutrients. They're not good at bringing them in. And so they bring all those nutrients back up to the headwaters of these watersheds. And without that extra nutrients, these floodplains are very sterile and they grow slower. And so, you know, we see a lot of these salmon carcasses pulled up on the banks by eagles, by bears. And so the nutrients aren't just focused into the river, they're focused into the floodplain and up into the uplands as well.
Yeah, so, you know, I was wondering with the construction equipment, how do you get that into the back country? That's got to be a process, right?
Oh, it is. Yeah. You know, we really depend on these contractors that know what they're doing. Generally, the way that the process goes is I find a reach of river that I think can be more productive. And then I reach out to the local contractors, sometimes after we get funding, sometimes before. If the site access is really questionable, then I'll bring them on right off the bat and kind of we'll walk through some ideas. You know, Jeff Roberts there, he was the one operating that piece of equipment. Him and I have walked a few streams just to brainstorm ideas about exactly that. How are we going to get equipment in here to restore the stream? But we really depend on their expertise and you know, they are really creative. They've been known to lower those whole excavators over what you and I would call a cliff, attached to a cable line that has a D8 bulldozer slowly lowering it down there to get to the river. So these guys are just tremendous, you know, their ability to operate in these really complex environments.
Yeah. Wow. That's cool. So what you do is really amazing. Do you guys have volunteer positions available? If people want to get involved with, you know, helping out with your projects, how can they do that? What do you recommend?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we've just right now, actually, we've got several volunteer opportunities to pot trees. So we grow a lot of our own trees. We buy them as 6 to 12 inch tall trees, and then we grow them to 4 to 5 feet tall in containers so that they have a higher likelihood of surviving out there in the wild. And so right now you can go to our Facebook page and look at our events page, and it shows the different lists of how to sign up for those events. And all of them are COVID safe. You know, our stewardship coordinator, Chelsea Packinens, is doing a spectacular job with that.
Cool. All right. I think we have one more question here. Somebody wants to know if we have any data on water temperatures.
Oh, that's a good question. So Harrington Creek is actually listed as 303D, water temperature impaired. And so they actually partnered, the Department of Ecology partnered with us. We got a Terry Houston grant for that to help with the revegetation after we did that work. And one might think that by taking out the trees next to the stream and opening it up to sunlight, you're going to cause it to heat up a lot. And you just see a slight temperature increase right off the bat. But by expanding that floodplain, we're actually charging that floodplain up all winter long. And the dynamic river going from pool to pool to pool, it creates exchange between the slow water flowing underneath the gravel and then that surface water coming over the top. When you increase that exchange between those two flow paths, you actually maintain cooler temperatures. So we're looking forward to the beaver getting in there and helping us out, because beaver dams are also known to retain water longer into the year and help maintain cooler temperatures. The South Fork in general has a lot cooler temperatures than a lot of the other regional rivers. You know, the Washougal I mentioned earlier can get very hot. It can, the East Fork Lewis River can get very, very hot, pushing 80 degrees in the summertime. Nice to swim in, but not good for fish.
Yeah.
And so we're trying to, in some of our strategy with this main stem South Fork Toutle work out there in the main floodplain, you saw that a lot of times the river's in a single thread channel and it's just falling right through a single thread. Well, if we can branch that out and force it into its floodplain, we can actually slow down the summer progression, the summer water loss, slow that process down and retain water, and that helps with water temperatures into the summer as well. So, yeah.
Very cool. Well, Brice, thank you so much. That was a great presentation. We really enjoyed having you here with us. So appreciate your time.
Yeah, Jared, thanks. Go ahead and forward any questions on to me that pop up later on, and I'll try and answer them the best I can.
Awesome. Thanks, Brice. Take care.
All right, you too.